he's not here, I don't think. Oh, yeah. Oh, thank you, Gus. So we are starting now. Okay. So hello, everyone. I think I'm on the other sort of edge of the spectrum of the familiarity with network analysis because I'm just a beginner. And this talk is mostly about exploration of network analysis as a tool that is useful and perhaps feasible, perhaps not, for the study of medieval annotations. So it's a sort of experiment. I didn't get very far. It's still work in progress, as you will see. And I have lots of room for your comments and recommendations. I'd be very glad to hear what you think about it and what do you advise how to go further. At the beginning, let me thank to my colleague Peter Boot, who is also participating from Haugens Institute, who helped me tremendously with encoding all of the material you're going to see into XML. And he was also instrumental in getting it out through his XSL wizardry. So all the data you're going to see in a form of R graphs and again, visualizations are due to his skills. So thank you for that, Peter. Early medieval annotations are a very specific kind of medieval text. They differ from standard texts that we're used to in that they have what may be considered low textual coherence. In standard text, we are used to the fact that a text has a certain structure, a certain order of words, and if that order is disturbed or if it's not there, if the text has different order of words, we recognize it as a different text. But this is not entirely true for glosses and annotations. Annotations in general tend to behave as coherent entities, each annotation on its own, even though they are transmitted in layers or assembled into larger corpora of hundreds or thousands of such annotations. And especially some types of annotations, those that I will be referring here as glosses, are sort of very low on that spectrum, and they are really behaving as separate Lego blocks where the early medieval annotators basically build each layer of glosses to their liking. So it's very difficult to see how related manuscripts containing layers of annotations, how related they are, and whether perhaps they contain exactly the same or very similar material, because it's for us very difficult to analyze that by sort of our standard methods, by our naked eye. And this was exactly why I organized and tried to use it to disentangle this problem and find some alternative ways how to approach this material and how to work with it. In my particular case, in my project, we're talking about glosses to the Etymologiae of Isidore of Seville. This text is the most important Latin encyclopedia of the Middle Ages. It was extremely important, particularly in the earlier period of the Middle Ages, when it became an important receptacle and vehicle of innovations. It underwent a process which can be likened to Wikipedization. And one of those innovations that concerned this text was annotation. This text began to be annotated already very early after its dissemination, so already in the 7th century, in several different ways. But I will be talking here specifically about one type of annotations, what I will be calling grammar glosses. That is the kind of annotations that are sort of very low on that spectrum of textual coherence. They are not very coherent, in other words. Grammar glosses are a phenomenon very particular to a specific context, and that is the Carolingian period. They are, in fact, a product of a very specific innovation from Carolingian environment, and that is a separation of one part of the encyclopedia, the part dedicated to grammar, and its separate circulation as a school text. And this is something that happened in Carolingian period. And we see that the glosses come into being and begin to circulate and be transmitted in the manuscripts connected with this school version of the Etymologiae. And they're very closely related in terms of geographical scope, chronology, and materiality. So for example, this school version was particularly popular in northern France, and this is also where we see most of these grammar glosses to appear. Unlike in the case of other types of annotations from the early Middle Ages, these grammar glosses, for which we do have substantial evidence for their diffusion, it's very clear that they're circulated. It's very clear they were transmitted, but it's very difficult to see how exactly it happened. And it is not possible in any way to treat them in sort of a schematic fashion to reconstruct their stemma, because that's not really what's happening. And we're likely going to see that a particular gloss recurs in multiple manuscripts and another gloss recurs in other group of manuscripts, but it's very difficult to see how these two or how other glosses connect together. This may have to do with the fact that schools were an important channel of transmission for this material, but there were probably also other kinds of channels and networks that were involved. Probably they were also copied in scriptoria. And one of the questions I would like to try to answer to use of network analysis is to see whether we can see some tangible evidence through the network analysis of which kinds of channels were used for the transmission. For this purpose, it's important to distinguish two different types of manuscripts that will feature also in the graphs and the analysis that will come. I will color code them pink and blue. So pink will be always grammatical handbooks and blue will be always encyclopedia copies. So these are two types of early medieval manuscripts in which we find these grammar glosses to the Etymologiae. The grammatical handbooks can be connected to the schools and instruction in the classroom. There are the manuscripts which contain the oldest layers of glosses. Also, two of the most important manuscripts are grammatical handbooks with most glosses. But at the same time, there's as many manuscripts of the grammatical handbook type as of encyclopedia copy type that contain glosses. So that's quite interesting. And the question is, what does it mean for the transmission? We can be reasonably sure that the glosses emerge through and because of the instruction in classroom. They're sort of a tool for the instruction. That's how they begin, but their life becomes much more complicated, and the transmission is not only governed by schools and the needs of schools. So let me tell you a little bit about my corpus. First, about the manuscripts we're talking about. These will be used as notes in the network, as you can guess, perhaps. We're talking here about 61 manuscripts. So this is a quite smaller set, as you will guess. Also, that as the data sets we have seen before, maybe that's also a bit of a problem. But we are talking here about 61 manuscripts. They can be distinguished into two categories. On one hand, we have a core consisting of 60 manuscripts that contain at least 40 glosses, up to 770. You can see them here in this chart with roughly the number of glosses they contain. And then there are 45 additional manuscripts which contain less than 40 glosses. These glosses come from the same pool of material, but they are much less represented. It's clear they're somehow related to the core, but it's not entirely clear how. Some of them are also in this chart, the ones that contain the most glosses, and they are sort of represented by this kind of striped color. As you can see from the color coding, there are some grammatical handbooks, and there are also encyclopedia copies, and they appear in both groups. The manuscripts come from 8th to 10th century, but they were annotated in the 9th to 11th century, so slightly later after when they come into being. And most of them come from northern France, but there are also some manuscripts from England and Brittany, northern Italy perhaps, and one manuscript from Germany. As for the glosses, the entire corpus of the grammar glosses to the Etymologiae consists of almost 4,000 glosses to the entire work. The work has 44 chapters of together about 13,000 words, so that you get an idea how heavily or not heavily glossed it is. I will call this a maximum corpus. This is the case when we count every single instance of glossing separately. We can also look at what is minimum corpus if we count only the unique instances of glosses, so no repetitions, and this corpus is in about 2,500 unique gloss pairs. In this, what follows, I will be using a smaller set because I have not completed my analysis yet. So I will be using only a maximum corpus of around which correspond to the first 37 chapters because I have not completed encoding yet. So it will be smaller, about 3/4 of the material are there. So this is about slightly smaller than what it will be in the end. These glosses can be distinguished to two types of glosses. On one hand, isolated glosses that appear only in a single manuscript. And on the other hand, what I will be calling shared glosses, that is glosses that appear at least in two manuscripts and more manuscripts. There are 1,216 glosses in the maximum corpus, or it could be 1,511 in the minimum corpus. So about 1/5 of the minimum corpus are shared glosses. And this is what the material I will be working with. Okay. Oh, yes. Okay. Here's one example of how it looks when you see a shared gloss. So you would see the same gloss appearing across multiple manuscripts. One big question is, what does it mean if you see a gloss, exactly the same gloss appearing in multiple manuscripts? Is it a source of relationship, and what is the nature of the thing with the glosses? And this is very particular to this material, is that they can emerge spontaneously. And when they do, it is possible that they will look similarly or alike Because if we are talking about situation in classroom and you have one particular text and the student asks, what does this word mean? Then the teacher, there's a likelihood that the teacher will come up independently with a very similar answer. And for this reason, I engage in sort of what I call non-triviality ranking. So I decided to rank the glosses, give them a rank from 1 to 4 based on how trivial or non-trivial they are. Glosses with high rankings are the ones that cannot be explained independently and therefore point to some form of transmission or circulation. Glosses with low ranking 1 and 2 are the ones which are likely to or may occur independently, and especially glosses with ranking 1 may be independent. On the contrary, glosses with number 4 cannot be explained in this way, and therefore it is rather obvious that they are transmitted and they are heavy. These ranks will be used as weights on the glosses, so they'll be adding weights to the material. So what can we do, or what I'm going to do is very similar to what other people have already done. We can start by looking at the relation. You can see which glosses appear in which manuscript and use it as a source of relationship, plotting them both as nodes as a sort of bipartite network. Because it will be quite a large network and not very comprehensive, we can immediately simplify it. Instead of individual glosses, we can look at gloss clusters. A cluster is a group of glosses that always travels together or always appears in manuscripts together. And we'll see there are fewer clusters. And in the end, we can progress one step further. And instead of doing a bipartite network, we can just use these clusters as edges and give them weight to see the relationship between manuscripts. So what you're going to see is a network representation of relationships between manuscripts. It is very important. We're not going to talk about or not directly see the transmission pattern. We don't know, it's very difficult to reconstruct. And one reason for that is that we should assume for this type of material that 95% of the manuscripts containing glosses are gone. We're looking into a very sort of very fragmented ecosystem, where the question is, how can we get from that fragmentation into sort of a picture nevertheless? It needs to be also added, many of the sort of manuscripts which would transmit glosses were transient manuscripts because they were classroom material. They were there to they disappeared within 1 or 2 generations. So this is very clear that there is lots of fragmentation. So let us start at the beginning. The very first step, if we plot top 33 manuscripts on one side and all 511 unique shared glosses on the other side with their labels, this is the kind of bipartite representation you can get. We can immediately simplify it because this is quite difficult. So we will instead, we can look at which glosses always travel together or appear together and say this is going to be a grouping of some sort. And instead of 511 unique shared glosses, we can get 275 groupings of glosses. This is roughly how they are distributed when it comes to how many glosses appear in such groupings. You can see there are 1 or 2 very interesting groupings, quite few interesting ones, and there are many ones that are actually very unimportant. In fact, there are 115 of these 175 groupings consist of only a single gloss, and moreover, many of them have a very low non-triviality ranking. So we can immediately forget about them. These are not real clusters. These are sort of a noise in the background, which is likely to emerge in this sort of situation. There are 21 more groupings, which consist of 2 or 3 glosses with very low rankings, and we can also forget about them. And in this way, we end up with a smaller set of 39 groupings, which can be considered clusters. They have a weight of 6 or more weight in this case, meaning the rank of the glosses, the non-triviality rank combined together. And then you can see how many glosses they consist of on one side, and also what is the combined weight of these glosses here. There are 13, let's say, important clusters which have a weight of at least 20, and there are 2 top clusters which stand out from among the rest as being extremely. That occurs in 2 manuscripts, Harley 3941 and Orleans 296, consists of 76 glosses with a total weight of 199. Another one is a cluster that occurs in manuscripts Orleans 296 and VLO 41, which consists of 29 glosses and has a weight of 55, so slightly lower. I will return back to the clusters and sort of because there's a lot more interesting to say about them. But let me first try to do the third step and draw you a nice sort of network graph where we use these clusters as edges. And when the nodes are the manuscripts, the nodes are colored according to schema introduced. So pink is for grammatical handbooks, blue is for encyclopaedia, copies, the edges are also colored along the same principle. So a pink edge is an edge between two grammatical handbooks, a blue edge is an edge between two encyclopedic copies, and sort of a purple edge goes from one type to another. This network, the representation was laid out according to the rough geographical point of origin of the individual manuscripts. And in many cases, this is also where they were annotated. So what you see here, this is northern France with VLO 41 down there. That is Fleury, an important monastery with a school, especially active in 10th century, beginning of the 11th century. Reims 4 to 6, that's Reims, actually a seat of the archbishop and also seat, locus of a very important cathedral school and monasteries as well. And this sort of cluster here, these are manuscripts which are connected to Paris because they were produced there or annotated there, and some of them were both produced and annotated there, especially in particular Orléans 296, a manuscript which has most glosses and which has also two very strong relations to other manuscripts. Up here we see England in the manuscript Paris 7585, which was produced and annotated in Canterbury. This is Brittany, and this is Northern Italy. Probably in case of these manuscripts, we cannot be sure. These are definitely Northern Italian. So you already see some very interesting things here. For example, you can hopefully see that these manuscripts from Paris they do not have strong connections between each other, or as strong connections between each other as they have to manuscripts from other places in case of Northern France or other regions, actually. That's quite interesting. And you can also notice that the grammatical handbooks come from this area, and here we have encyclopedic copies. But let me get back. I hope I still have time to some of the facts about the clusters, interesting things. So I said there are 39 clusters that can be identified and we can reasonably assume are actual real clusters, not just a noise or just some aggregation of glosses. And what is interesting about them is most of these clusters represent relationship between that is unique to two manuscripts. So we see a group of glosses that recurs in two manuscripts only, and not more. Sorry. There are some examples of clusters that occur across three manuscripts, but way fewer in this group and in this top 39. And there's only one cluster of only two glosses, moreover, this is shared between 5 manuscripts, and only one cluster that shows relationship between 6 manuscripts. I don't know exactly why is that. This may have to do with the level of fragmentation of the whole sort of original ecosystem, that we are looking actually at small bits and pieces of what would be sort of clusters which would be sort of shared more broadly, perhaps. But we do not see that because many of the manuscripts are gone. But it also may suggest sort of a low transmission rate for the grammar glosses. And it is even possible, in fact, that these clusters are very transient in nature, that actually a cluster comes into being because of transmission needs. So there is a circle or a school or an institution that is sending material to another school and institution that creates a cluster for this purpose. The cluster is transmitted, embedded into the different manuscript on the other side, or manuscripts on the other side, and then it sort of dissipates. And if that second institution or circle passes material on, it creates a new cluster than passing on material that was already available to it. Another interesting thing about the clusters is that actually they come in 2 different varieties, and that becomes quite obvious after sort of a bit of analysis. We have what may be called visible and invisible clusters. Visible clusters are of the kind that sort of a good philologist would also notice, and they can be seen from collation of the manuscript. And the main reason for this is that they concern smaller segments of text. They appear close to each other. They are not interspersed by glosses from other clusters or isolated glosses, and they usually concern smaller sections, such as 1 or 2 chapters. What's also interesting about them, these clusters tend to have relatively high average ranking of about 2.5, and many of them contain a high number of non-trivial glosses with ranks 3 and 4. Here you see the averages, and here you see the 6 visible clusters I was able to identify. You can also notice that they all, you perhaps cannot notice this, but many of them are manuscripts of the encyclopedic type. On the other hand, we have what may be considered invisible clusters, and these are ones I did not see before I performed this sort of analysis, this quantitative analysis. Because they came out of this exercise, so to say. It is because the glosses that constitute these clusters do not appear next to each other. They are rather distributed across the entire text, or most of it, not close to each other, interspersed by other glosses, whether shared or isolated. And also what is interesting, they tend to have relatively low average rank of under 2 or 2 or less. And some of them are made only of glosses with ranks of 1 or 2. For example, this cluster, which was the second most important cluster in the whole corpus, actually is constituted only with glosses of rank 1 and 2. And also you can notice, or maybe you don't, but many of the manuscripts, most of the manuscripts here are of the grammatical type, of the grammatical handbook type. If you plot it here, you can see that the yellows are visible clusters and green are invisible clusters. And you can also see that the yellow ones appear between manuscripts of the encyclopedic copies, and the green are either between grammatical manuscripts or in one case, rhymes 4 to 6 is also quite interesting because it contains many of these invisible clusters as well, even though it is an encyclopedic copy. And there is a good reason for it. A small detail here. I hope at least those who can read Latin can see it here. It is because this Rhymes manuscript contains the oldest layer of glossing there are stylus glosses. That is glosses that were not put in by ink, but by lead stylus. This is the stylus, and this is the instrument with which it is used. That is wax tablet. So they're probably carried over from a wax tablet. This is extremely unique. This is in my corpus, and I have not seen it elsewhere yet. It is in Latin context. Wax tablets were used in schools, and it's possible that what we are looking at here is that this encyclopedic copy was annotated directly from material that comes through this transient medium from school environment. I think I should end here. So I just want to reiterate these visible and invisible clusters. It was the most surprising thing I've seen. It's very interesting that one are more aligned with encyclopedic copies, and the clustering, the pattern of clustering is more consistent with copying rather than with, let's say, instruction in classroom, and therefore may be indicative of the work of scriptoria on one hand, while the invisible clusters, which are more common in grammatical handbooks and also show other patterns, for example, low ranks of glosses may have to do with oral and mnemonic transmission, maybe more connected with schools and the transmission via school. This is where I want to end for now. So this is where the analysis so far brought me. As you can see, I didn't get very far, and I would like to get further. It helped me to identify several interesting clusters of glosses, including such that I would not be able to see otherwise. It helped me to see differences between two types of clusters, those that I call visible and invisible, and I also have a sense that maybe we're looking at these visible and invisible cluster, it's looking at two different channels of transmission, copying in scriptorium on one hand and transmission in school environment on the other hand. Yes, this is where I will stop for now because I think I'm already speaking for too long, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Evina. I think you're perfectly in time. We would even still have some more time. So we have plenty of time for questions and discussions. It was a very interesting presentation, and I'm actually impressed by the amount of data you have. So I don't think that it's a small corpus, to be honest. So are there questions, remarks?
Sorry. Can I ask a question?
Okay, yeah, then, yeah.
It's me. I have my camera turned off.
Yeah, that's fine.
Hello. I just wanted to ask about something at the very beginning where you were talking about the types of glosses, and you said there are 3 types: the scholarly, the insular, and the grammatical glosses. And I was just wondering what glosses